So I won't talk about that now, but you can ask me about it later. The title is probably like somewhat of a misnomer because I feel like we've heard more dramatic things already. But keeping up with the contrarians, editors who ignore best practices. So we all know that in order for a journal to function well, best practices need to be in place. So we'll look at what happens when editors do not adhere to these practices, and most importantly, what editorial assistants can do to help. So we'll focus specifically on 3 examples of editors who didn't conform to their journal's accepted practices. And then we'll discuss the specific steps that the editorial assistants did take. And then each scenario, and then again at the end, we'll look at the takeaway for editorial assistants. So maybe what could have been done that wasn't, or you could carry it on and say, maybe this too could become its own best practice. Let's step back for a moment and talk about why we have best practices. So first and foremost, it ensures that all team members in the editorial office are performing at the same high level. So this includes every part of the editorial office, which I've illustrated with these bubbles centered around the editor-in-chief. Everyone who has a different kind of job, like the editor-in-chief is different than the managing editor, is different than the journal office administrator. Everyone has their own things that they're dealing with, but it's very important that each team member performs at the same high level. Best practices also help to regulate workloads, and this is something I'll touch on again and again, but it guarantees that authors and reviewers are treated equally throughout the peer review process and throughout the journal. Okay, so on to my examples and what editorial assistants can do. So the first one, you could read that little blurb quietly to yourself. But this is a quote from an editorial assistant whose editor had a habit of rescinding reviews that maybe didn't support the decision, or they were, not very thorough, like a couple sentences of superficial review material. And so the editor would rescind the reviews. And for this editorial assistant and this platform, every time a review got rescinded, and I suspect in other platforms as well, they don't get credit for it. And then the reviewer gets some kind of email that says, please submit the review. And they're like, well, what's going on? I submitted my review. It's very frustrating and confusing. So why do we even have this option? I mean, plain and simple, most of the time, using it in the correct way is just, oops, I uploaded the wrong review. Please rescind it so I can upload the right one for this paper and this journal. So why would we not want to do that? So the issue is, again, as I mentioned, if the review is rescinded, the reviewer doesn't get credit for the review. And the big picture at hand here, if you step back a little bit, is it's compromising the nature of the peer review process. So we don't want to rescind reviews because we want to present the direct and honest feedback from the reviewers to the authors. So the key here is transparency, like we were talking about earlier. Okay, so in this particular place, and this may or may not be the person, these are just some office photos that we took that we have permission to use. So the editorial assistant found and resubmitted the reviews. If there's any kind of confirmation email, do send it to yourself so as to not further confuse people, and then made a note just to himself or herself to exclude the reviewer comments from that decision letter. So then she or he reached out to the editor to explain the issue. So I want to turn to additional steps that could be done here because I don't think it was exhausted in this situation. So first of all, we recommend you use your chain of command. So reach out to, if you're an editorial assistant, reach out to your JOA or your managing editor. And then if you're at that level, reaching out to the editor-in-chief. We also recommend writing an email, or better yet, a phone call if they're keen to it, to explain the issue. And part of what is important here is talking about, the alternative option. Hey, you can tailor the decision letter. If you want to say that review 1 is not thorough, please pay particular attention to reviewer 2. There's a great example of how to do that. And fun bonus, not featured in the slide, this happened to me yesterday, which was very exciting. I was like, what an apt time for this to happen. So I had an editor rescind a review And the recommendation was reject, and they were like, I would like this changed to major revisions so the author can make revisions. And I was like, interesting. So I resubmitted the review, and I was like, in this situation, it's preferable that you just go in and edit your decision letter to say, yes, the recommendation was reject, but I'm making a decision to send these comments back to you so you can revise it. Okay, example 2, pretty short and sweet. And I'm sure we've seen this before, but this was a temporary editor who I think was there for a little bit longer, who never really learned how to navigate Scholar One despite having that initial training session, and had everything emailed to them, and then emailed everything back, even on the iPhone. So it was very brief, and I'm sure full of spelling errors. So why do we have this option to work outside of the system? Everyone travels, like everyone here traveling this conference. So it happens, and you may have a temporary time where you don't have access to that system. Why it is bad. So I think we mentioned Scholar One earlier, and I'm sure other platforms have this as well, but the audit trail, beautiful thing that it is, recording emails and notes and any actions pertaining to the manuscript. So working outside the system means that you lose access to this. It's not all in one place. And since it's not all in one place, editors may not have all the information they need to make a decision. So I'm thinking of if you have a manuscript at the revision stage, it's impossible for an editor who works entirely outside the platform to easily glean all the information they need if they're not comfortable with it. They can't find the old decision letter, they can't find the author response, the previous reviews, the highlighted manuscript file. The other effect is that by constantly emailing, more things are coming in. It's this continuous loop. You can never truly be done as an editor. So I think that's one thing that's hard for editors to see, those who like everything emailed to them, and journal metrics can suffer as a result of just always being a little bit behind. So the solution, and to be fair, I'm not sure what happened in this case, but I think and hope it's that first bullet point. So to get the editor-in-chief's ear, and then also to encourage either through the editor-in-chief or through that editor to set up more regular training. Visuals really help, either screen sharing sessions or using screenshots is very helpful. And one thing that we talk about at Technica is that it's the responsibility of the editorial assistants to be experts on that particular platform. And we should know all the ins and outs of it. And this level of knowledge is not needed for editors, but at the same time, it's important for editorial assistants to have that and to know when to step in and help their editors out in their preferred communication style so that they understand the system functionalities that they need to do their role. And there I just put like a little bit of sample text. I think it's important when you bring this up with your editor to show the value add of additional training because they're busy people, and I would also avoid any publishing jargon here and just let them know you're willing, you're happy to do it, not complicated jargon, but like I'm going to make your job easier, not just this one time, but all of the other times. And definitely using that conference call just to walk them through the flow of a paper in this journal. How do they do all of the things that they need to know how to do, from selecting and inviting reviewers to making a decision, finding the reviews. I know we probably all got emails from editors that's like, I can't find the reviews, and it's like they're always in the same spot. They're always there. But it's those common things, and they're just busy. So. And the great thing that you could do, taking it a step further, is establishing as many upfront procedures as you can. So I'm thinking of if manuscripts come in from revision, if you have something automatically set up, like if it's something, beyond minor revisions, more major, just immediately inviting the previous reviewers, like, boy, does that streamline things. So that would be great if you set that up. Okay, example number 3. Okay, so an editorial assistant whose editor kept inviting himself or herself as a reviewer on manuscripts and was like, that's interesting. They consulted with the JOA about it, and the JOA is like, oh, okay, well, this happens from time to time. It's really all right. And the editorial assistant was like, okay. And then something great happened. They didn't just ignore it. So they noticed that it continued to be an issue, and then once again went to the JOA. But I'll get into what they did to resolve it. So often it would only be the editor's anonymous review and one other reviewer, and then the editor would make a decision, even though this journal preferred 3 reviews. So why do we even have this option? I'm sure we've all seen this, but sometimes it's hard finding enough reviewers, or the reviews are divided, and it would be great to weigh in. And this gets back to, why is it so bad to do this? Again, it undermines the transparency of the peer review process, and you're compromising the integrity of the whole thing. So big deal. So in this scenario, the assistant used the chain of command, turning to the JOA before taking any other action. And then the cool thing is that they noticed there was still an issue, went back to the JOA. The JOA eventually talked to the editor-in-chief, who changed the policy. And in a minute, I'll show you some text, made anonymous, to preview how they communicated this change to other editors. Other steps that could be taken here is that the editor, rather than remaining anonymous, can say in that decision letter, I'm reviewer too, full disclosure. Or avoid that altogether, rather than submitting a review, just tailoring the decision editor to add their comments as the editor. Okay, and here's that sample text I was talking about. So I think I like this a lot because it's clear that they wanted to loop the editors in, that this is something that they've been talking about. A decision has been made. They're deciding not to hide behind the guise of peer review. So if you want to make technical comments, you need to say, here are my comments, not hide it as an anonymous reviewer. Okay, tact. There's some editorial assistants being tactful. I think, no, they had it posed for a long time. So I think it's really important in each of these situations. Maybe some of these sound like, oh yeah, I would do that. But one thing that I've noticed, as a managing editor and looking over some of people's emails, is that you'd be surprised sometimes by the word choice decisions that happen, and you just got to be careful about the language here and tread lightly and not use too much jargon, and make it clear that this is to help them, and always provide alternative solutions. Never be like, we don't do that. It is not done. So I think you have to be very tactful about it. So a few more final takeaways for all of these editorial assistants. It's essential to understand the peer review process. So in each of these situations, it was their knowledge of the peer review process that led them to catch all of these issues. And at the same time, they needed to be experts on their particular platform. So not only could they catch the issues, but they could also say, I know something about ScholarOne or whatever platform, and I know how to help you not only resolve this situation, but streamline it and make it even better in future cases. And I think the last bullet point goes beyond just applying to editorial assistants, but everybody in publishing, is how essential it is to know how to problem solve, because these were just 3 examples, and I can guarantee that somewhere out there in some editorial office, a variation of these may be happening, or maybe something you've never heard of. You really never know. So problem solving and using your resources, so using your journal's accepted practices, and then also following the chain of command is extremely important. So thank you. Ooh. Here's all of our happy editorial assistants. Very much.